Triumph Talks, we are continuing the conversation with John Peace as he shares an intriguing story his grandfather, a B-17 bomber pilot, shared while he was stationed in England at Bury St. Edmunds Air Force Base. These stories come from John's #1 Amazon best-selling book, A Boy from Cracker's Neck. Thank you for coming back, John, and sharing the stories that you've preserved for us all to learn about.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
So this story actually comes from a chapter in your book, and the chapter is really interesting because it begins with some of the statistics of just how dangerous it was to be a bomber pilot. So I'd like to just begin by sharing some of those statistics, and maybe you can kind of give us a little more background. It says that the U.S. 8th Air Force, which flew daylight missions over Europe, had a death rate of 19%. For those who were lucky enough to survive being shot down, the odds of becoming a prisoner of war were even higher, at 17%. The RAF Bomber Command, who flew the more dangerous night missions, had a staggering death rate of 44.5%. That is a huge jump from the 19% in the daytime, with only an 8% chance of becoming a POW. That would be interesting to see why those statistics varied so much between day and night. The reality of the situation was that the average bomber crew member was just 22 years old and facing near impossible odds. Despite the high death toll, the rules of the game remained unchanged. Why do you write that? Why do you comment on it, the rules of the game not changing?
Well, I mean, we're sitting here looking back, and you would think a death rate. Okay, 4 or 5 missions, chances are, your odds were up and you were going to die. You would think they would lower the limit from 25.
Yeah,
Because nobody was getting to 25.
that's right, because 25 was the minimum.
And for no other reason, just to give people hope of getting out of this thing alive. You read the statistics between nighttime and daytime. I did ask my Papaw about the British flying at night, and one of the reasons why the death rate was even more staggering for them was, this was an era of technology. There was no radar. So could you imagine flying at night, and you could not use any lights inside the cabin because that would attract fighter, or that would alert anti-aircraft artillery. So you had to keep your cabins dark, and you were flying at night in formation in the dark.
And they're not looking down at the ground. I don't know. Did they ever use the ground for bearing where they were?
No, well, especially at night, if it was
where they were.
Yeah. Well, that was the navigator's job, and through compass and mathematics and navigation that goes all the way back to the Vikings, sailing their ships.
Yeah, but here we are in aircraft. It's almost like they were in between, because I know in our last episode you talked about, or the first one I believe it was, you talked about how your grandpa was watching the television as they were using smart bombs. I believe it was in Operation Desert Storm, and he hops up and he said, "Wow, if we had that technology, we could have won the war just ourselves with one trip." To see that, I think that shows the challenges, and the death rate came from just the lack of technology as much as the danger of those on the ground that were trying to prevent them with those kind of shot up the flak. Was it flak that largely caused them to fail to return?
That's what they were scared to death of, was flak.
And the enemy fighters, did they come up at night? Do you know?
Now, the enemy fight, no. Okay. So that was why the British would go at night, because they didn't have to combat the
But it wasn't any safer not to have them, apparently, according to these statistics.
No. Yeah. And, and one of the things that, of course, when you watch movies and stuff, it's always their fear was the fighters. And yes, fighters were terrible, and that was a great fear. But what really scared them to death was the flak, because you never knew that was coming. At least with fighter planes that were shooting, at least you felt like you had a fighting chance. Yeah. And you could see it coming.
Yeah, literally.
Or
you're
flak,
fighting them.
there's literally just times where flak, if it was a direct hit, a plane would just blow up. So it was like walking through a field with landmines. You were just,
Oh, that's
just
an
waiting for your
interesting
chance.
comparison. For those who
Yeah.
fought on the ground and those in the sky, it's like having landmines. I like that. So, a little more from your book. It says
Hmm.
before 1944, each crew had to complete the 25 grueling combat missions in order to be eligible to return home. Unfortunately, the statistics of the time showed that each crew member only had a 1 in 4 chance of making it to their 25th mission. This meant that on
Hmm.
average, each crew member could only expect to survive for about 12 to 14 missions. And then you kind of go into the odds for certain positions, and especially the tail gunner. What was the life
Hmm.
expectancy for someone who was the tail gunner in a bomber crew?
Oh, I mean, it was twice as
Mm,
dangerous to be a tail gunner.
yeah.
And I remember one time asking them about that because now they were very susceptible to fighter planes because most of the time the Luftwaffe would come up behind the
Hmm.
formation because fighter planes were much faster. So, they'd be flying bombers in formation, and then the Nazis would launch their fighter planes so they'd catch up to them. So the first person that was getting shot at was the tail gunner
Oh, okay.
in most
Very
cases. So
interesting.
that's why their
That's why
statistics,
they're.
or they were coming up after them, and then it was the belly
Yeah,
turret
you have that
gunner.
next. The ball turret.
Yeah.
The ball turret gunner was actually even that was in second position, or no, actually, it's one of
Yep.
the most dangerous positions
Yes.
because they're the ones that are underneath the
Hmm.
plane. But the danger was partly that if the plane was hit, I'm reading from your book again, but he wants to see
Yeah.
a little bit of the cover there. If the plane was hit and the engines were damaged, it might knock out the turret's electrical or hydraulic system,
Yes.
trapping him. And then, if the damage affected the landing gear, the full weight of the plane would
Mm.
come crashing down on the ball turret gunner and the skid, leaving nothing but scraps of metal
Mm.
and shattered dreams. Wow,
Yeah.
that's quite that's quite a statement. To think about that. I mean, I know we've all watched Memphis Belle. Well, probably a lot of people have
Hmm.
watched Memphis Belle, and we saw that there's a part where the ball turret gunner is like trapped and he's freaking out and they're trying to get him out.
Yeah.
But they don't show the experience of what would happen if he hadn't got out. Which is just he's
Yes.
just and but the thing is this is the reality of war. I think sometimes we watch movies that. I mean, they definitely have the tragic moments, but you kind of get the heroic moments where they just get saved in the nick of time. But to think about just how many men died that way, oh, I
Yeah.
can't imagine. And the thing is, I have just thinking about it, putting some imagination to it. What if these things happened? What if the electrical or hydraulic went out and they couldn't get out? Or what if the landing gear was gone and they had to land? That
Hmm.
ball turret gunner is in there knowing his death is imminent. Not able
Yes.
to get out, and, and
Hmm.
they just and they just land. Wow, that's quite something. So there's actually a really interesting story that you have in this chapter that we're talking about, and I'm going to set the scene a little bit, and then I want you to take
Hmm.
it from there. So the
Okay.
the scene is that they're at this Bury St. Edmonds Air Field, Air Base. They lived in barracks, and
Hmm.
they would all go on the missions. And I guess there were various groups, and they'd fly at different times, but they got to know each other really well, and there was a protocol for what to do with their personal belongings because based on the statistics we just discussed, a lot of people did die
Hmm.
and get missing and not come back. So they would wait a little while, and then they would actually, rather than sending the personal belongings home, it was the protocol at that time to divide it up among the others that were in their barrack. And I think it's interesting that you write here that the items would be often distributed to settle any outstanding debts from poker games. That
Yeah.
was probably the first people to get it, were the ones that had won a poker game that they owed.
And let me set that scene a little bit of.
Yes, please
I mean, that
take it
seems
from
very
there. We know
impersonal. Not,
where we're
yeah.
going
Okay.
with it.
Um,
So
my I remember, I would hear some of these stories, and they would be little snippets of jokes and hijinks and all that. And my granddad always, one of the movies he said that was so true. It wasn't World War II movie. It was the early 70s MASH movie in 1972 when it came out. And they were surrounded by so much death and destruction. So the hijinks and the jokes were just everywhere, and you lived in the moment.
Yeah.
You lived to the next poker game. That's all that. That was all you hoped for,
Mm-hmm.
was not to get home. My granddad said, you'd already kind of realized that, I'm not getting out of this,
Probably,
and neither is
probably took
nobody
the
else.
pressure off them not to be
Yeah.
worried about their 1 in 4 chance of living. So they just had to.
Yeah.
Interesting. It'd be interesting to find out what it's like to live so in the moment. I'm sure that they did, because that might be all you
What
have is this moment.
I know, and what's interesting, my granddad would talk about, that was probably the most peaceful time in his life.
Wow. You aren't
Because
stressed about the future like the rest of us get. You're just
yeah,
like, I just want to get through
so
the war.
there, so thus the hijinks, thus
Mhm.
the laughter, and I put in like 1 in 4. I put in perspective. I played high school football, and they say you play 10 games in a season, a local game. Can you imagine every game you were getting on the bus with 20% less people, and they were gone
Yeah.
forever
And
on your
pretty
team?
dramatic, gory ways in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the setup with the hijinks, where they play poker, where they everything was about a bet. They were always love
Mhm.
practical jokes, but it was a stress relief. If you study psychology, they're doing that because of what a terrible situation they're
Well,
in,
and I'll
and
point out that your book is very entertaining and
yeah,
very funny at a
yeah,
lot of times, and I think it's because of that.
yeah.
You are able to capture what your grandfather and all those around him that talk to you, the veterans that you grew up around, and convey the humor and the personalities that they had, as well as the
Mhm.
history. And yeah.
And for us sitting here looking back, a little bit of their hijinks and jokes would look like a little dark humor, but it
Yeah.
was just the situation they were
Yeah.
in. You would think that ain't too funny, but for them, they had to make
Which
fun
is
of it.
very
That's
entertaining.
how they survived,
Yeah.
and everything. But I'll
So
go ahead and get started
so
on
in the
this if
book,
you would like.
there's
Okay,
a person yeah, go ahead and share about the person who they thought had been
back
deceased.
from the dead.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, After a few months of terrible missions with heavy losses, Jimmy took some of the rations back to his captain's barracks just to eat and lay down. But little did he know the real entertainment for the night was about to begin. The sudden and forceful opening of the barracks' big metal door was like a thunderbolt in the still of the night, jolting Jimmy and his fellow airmen from their slumber. As he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and peered out from the bunk, Jimmy's heart raced with fear. Was it air raid? Well, if it was air raid, where was the alarm siren? But before he could fully comprehend what was happening, the figure of William Masters appeared in the doorway, looking more disabled and exhausted than Jimmy had ever seen him
And
before.
to pause right there, I think we need to set up
Yes.
that he is William Masterson had been
Hmm.
lost for how long? Even
Months.
months
Yeah.
and months lost, and they had long since divided up his belongings among everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now, yeah, now.
And also, William, his name was William. He
Mhm,
was a bunkmate. He was actually
mhm.
shared the bunk underneath my
So he was
Papaw.
right underneath. Yeah.
So And so that was the first person over
Mhm.
there that my granddad kind of formed any kind of relationship, and he didn't come home. Neither, the whole plane didn't come home, and they kept going to the Red Cross. He said they'd have Red Cross type posters where they would show if somebody was labeled a POW in a
And
German.
they'd keep watching for that,
Yeah,
and then finally
you always hope.
they'd give up hope enough to go ahead and divide the personal belongings. So
Yeah.
they'd done this for a long time, watched and watched and watched, and he wasn't showing up anywhere. And so,
And I wish I could write down. This is one story my papa would be milking
yeah.
cows that he would animate. He wasn't big on but he would animate this story over and over. So I'll continue here, boys. This is William Masters. Boys, you won't believe what happened to me. William yelled with his voice ringing with excitement and urgency. Got shot down over northern France and had to hitchhike my ass all the way back here. Jimmy and the others gaped in disbelief as William strode into the barracks, recounting the harrowing tale and survival and determination. They listened in awe as he described his treacherous journey, dodging enemy patrols, relying on the kindness of strangers to make it back to England. And then, with a sudden change of tone, William's expression darkened and he announced another thing. I want all my shit back. And my papa would say he'd just be pointing at everybody because he knew everybody had his
I could
stuff.
just picture your grandpa standing there reenacting him, pointing at everybody,
Yes.
wanting his stuff back. Yes.
Oh, yeah. He was going to get his stuff
Yeah.
back. He knew. And he cast his gaze around the barracks, fixing each of his comrades with a stern look. I know my personal belongings would have been gobbled up among you fuckers, but I want them all back now. The airman shifted nervously, realizing William meant business because this was a big man. He was a tall 6'4" man. They scurried to gather up his possessions, returned them to him with sheepish apologies. But as they did so, William couldn't help but let out a chuckle real loud. Relax, boys, he said with a smirk. I'm just messing with you guys. I've been gone for months. I'm sure you need something to remember me by. So he, and probably not only they had done that with his belongings, he'd done the same thing with other people's belongings. He had, so he knew the drill. The airman let out a collective sigh of relief, and a few even chuckled along with William. But seriously, though, he continued, I'm starving. Any chance that one of you guys could rustle up some grub? And of course, he's coming in the middle of the night, and the mess hall's not open, so he's hungry. As the night progressed, the homemade hooch started flowing. The mood in the barracks became increasingly light and jovial. William's infectious laughter, devil-may-care attitude had the men in stitches as they eagerly listened as he shared stories of his adventures with the French resistance. William and Masters, after his B-17 was shot down, found himself in a foreign land and separated from his crew, surrounded by the enemy. Fear gripped him as he fled through the dark, winding streets and the sound of Nazi boots pounding the pavement behind him. The French underground resistance had taken him in, risking their own lives to protect him, but it came at a cost. He had witnessed brutal and senseless deaths of many resistant fighters who'd aided him in his escape. As William made way through the treacherous countryside, he saw the devastation brought by the occupying forces. The smell of death hung heavy in the air, and he knew that at any moment he could fall victim to the wrath of the Nazis. But he pressed on, driven by the desire to return home to Bury St. Edmunds and his comrades in arms. Despite the dangers, the resistance smuggled William across the border and back to England. As he landed on the English soil, he fell to his knees, overcome with emotion and gratitude for those who had risked everything to save him. He looked back across the channel, thinking of the lives lost and the bravery of those who had fought against the Nazi oppressors. William would never forget the sacrifices made by the resistance fighters who gave everything to protect their fellow man from the horrors of war. But what really got everybody's attention was William's tales of the beautiful French women that he had encountered during his time with the underground resistance. And of course, my granddad would animate that too.
Oh my goodness.
The men roared with laughter as he regaled with the stories of romantic escapades. You can imagine this is getting into tall tale stuff now.
Oh yeah,
And close calls,
got
each
this
one more
fish,
outrageous than the last. Yeah. Jimmie couldn't help but smile, feeling grateful for the bond they shared. And this is where the moments of joy, they experienced together. Happiness, amongst what they were going through at the time. As the night wore on, the group became more somber as William recounted the harsh realities of war. They'd mourned the loss of their comrade Jeb, the tail gunner on William's B-17, who had already been shot. He was already killed before they even bailed out, so they knew he was dead at that time. He was shot by a Nazi fighter before the rest of the crew had bailed out. They raised a glass in memory, and in that moment, Jimmie was filled with a sense of comrades and brotherhood that transcended all else. Despite the horrors they faced each day, they were bonded together by their shared experiences and their unwavering determination just to see their mission through. And this is, of all the stories I heard from all these men in here, this was probably the only one that really was completely, it was about fun. It was about a good ending, because all the other stories, there was moments of laughter and stuff, but there was always this undertone of sadness, of loss. So this was the one happy story and completely happy story.
Well, you have a few other happy stories in the book that I'm sure we'll be sharing soon, but I really love that one because of just, the way that you write it too. The title of this chapter is Surprise at 2 a.m. We gave it a little different title here for YouTube just to intrigue y'all to wonder who's coming back from the dead. But yeah, it's such a great story, and we'll be sharing more like it in the upcoming episodes. So for all of you watching, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel to learn more exciting, inspiring, and historically important stories. Also, if you are interested in becoming a published author yourself, follow this channel to learn how, because I'll be posting a lot of other videos just to kind of share some of my expertise as a publisher of Triumph Press, and also just to help you have the confidence to believe you can write and share important stories. So in the next interview with John Peace, we will learn about Operation Gomorrah, the first time the U.S. Air Force targeted civilians, and what that was like for those commanded to fulfill these missions, including the perspective of John's grandfather, Captain Jimmie Galloway. Thanks for watching.